The way I see it, marriages ain't all sunshine and roses. Mine, well, it started off good, better than good, really. Her name was Lisa, and she had a laugh that could light up the whole room. We met at a barbecue my buddy hosted, and it didn't take long before we were head over heels. But over the years, things started to change. At first, it was small stuff. She stayed late at work more often or spent more time scrolling through her phone. I didn't think much of it. I figured everybody gets busy sometimes. But then her laugh didn't feel the same, and when she smiled, it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was like she was there, but not there. Looking back now, maybe I should have seen the signs earlier. Maybe I didn't want to. Lisa started coming home smelling like fancy cologne I didn't wear. She told me she was hanging out with friends, but she'd never bring them up afterward, and me, I just tried to brush it off. After all, we'd been through too much together for me to believe she'd step out on us like that. I remember the night everything changed like it was yesterday. Lisa had left her phone on the kitchen counter, which was odd because she usually kept it glued to her hand. I wasn't trying to snoop or anything, but the screen lit up and a message popped up. It was from someone named Mark. "Can't stop thinking about you," it said. At first, I thought, maybe it's a joke or a misunderstanding, but something in my gut told me different. I swiped up on the screen, and there was a string of messages that weren't meant for me to see. Words that cut deeper than I could have imagined. They talked about meeting up, about feelings, about things I didn't want to picture. My hands started shaking, and my mind went blank. I couldn't believe it. Lisa, my wife, the woman I'd built a life with, was having an affair. Part of me wanted to slam the phone down and pretend I hadn't seen a thing. But there was no going back from this. I couldn't let it sit. That night, when Lisa came home, I was waiting. She walked through the door with a cheery "Hey, hon," but her face fell when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in front of me. "What's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She froze like a deer caught in headlights. "What's what?" she replied, but her tone gave her away. "Don't play dumb, Lisa," I said, holding up her phone. "Who's Mark?" Her face turned pale, and for a second I thought she might lie. But then her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. "I can explain," she said softly. "Explain," I snapped. "You've been sneaking around behind my back, and you want to explain." She started talking fast, tripping over her words, saying it wasn't serious, that it was just a stupid mistake. She swore up and down it didn't mean anything, but the texts I read told a different story. "You think this is nothing," I said, my voice rising. "You think lying to me, to us, is nothing." She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled back. The room felt like it was closing in on me, and every word out of her mouth felt like another punch to the gut. After Lisa went to bed that night, I sat alone in the dark. My head was spinning, and my heart felt like it had been torn in two. I kept going over everything in my mind, every moment, every sign I'd ignored. How could I have been so blind? I was angry, sure. But more than that, I was hurt. I loved her. I'd built my life around her, trusted her completely. And now it felt like all of that had been ripped away. The worst part was the doubt. Was it something I did? Had I not been enough for her? I kept replaying the good times we'd had, trying to figure out when things had gone wrong. By the time the sun came up, I was completely drained. I hadn't slept a wink, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. The next day, I couldn't bring myself to look at Lisa. Every time she tried to talk, I'd cut her off or find an excuse to leave the room. I wasn't ready to hear her apologies or whatever excuses she had lined up. I needed space to think. I spent most of the day driving aimlessly around town, my thoughts bouncing between anger and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to confront Mark, the guy she'd been sneaking around with. But what would that solve? He wasn't the one who made promises to me she was. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. We needed to talk, really talk, even if it tore me apart. I couldn't live in limbo, and I needed to know where we stood. That night, I told her we had to figure this out, whether that meant fixing what we had or walking away. I can't do this alone, I said, my voice low but firm. If you want to save this marriage, you've got to show me. Otherwise, we're done, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. I want to fix this, she whispered. I don't want to lose you. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Lisa and I decided to go to counseling, though I wasn't sure if it was for us or just for me to make sense of what had happened. I told her outright trust wasn't something that would come back overnight, if it ever did. She swore she'd cut all ties with Mark, and I made her show me the messages where she ended it. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had broken between us, something that might never fully heal. I tried to focus on myself, to hitting the gym more often, spending time with friends I hadn't seen in years. I needed to remember who I was outside of being Lisa's husband. And honestly, it helped. In the end, we decided to stay together, at least for now. It wasn't perfect, and it might never be, but we were trying. Some days were better than others. Some days I couldn't even look at her without feeling the weight of everything that had happened. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let this define me. Whether we made it or not, I'd find my way back to solid ground. For a while, it felt like we were walking on eggshells around each other. Lisa tried harder than ever. She'd cook my favorite meals, leave little notes in my lunch, and constantly tell me how much she regretted what she'd done. It was almost too much. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but every time her phone buzzed, I couldn't help but feel my chest tighten. I'd catch myself watching her out of the corner of my eye, looking for any sign that she was lying again. One night, she caught me staring. "Do you think I'm still talking to him?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said, "I don't know what to think, Lisa. You broke my trust, and that doesn't just come back because you say you're sorry." Her face crumpled, and she left the room without another word. I felt bad, but it was the truth. How could I pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't? About a month after we started counseling, something happened that shook everything up again. I was cleaning out the garage when I came across an old box of Lisa's stuff. Tucked inside was a journal. Now, I know what you're thinking. Snooping in someone's journal is a low blow. But in that moment, curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't looking for trouble, I just wanted answers. As I flipped through the pages, I found entries from months before the affair came to light. She'd written about feeling trapped, about wanting more excitement in her life. And then there were the entries about Mark, how he made her feel seen and alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. I slammed the journal shut, my hand shaking. It felt like ripping open a wound that had barely started to heal. All the progress we'd made felt pointless. She wasn't just sorry because she hurt me, she was sorry because she got caught. That night, I confronted her about the journal. She broke down in tears, swearing that she'd felt lost but that she was committed to us now. "I didn't know how to talk to you about what I was feeling," she said. "But I do now. I want to fix this, no matter what it takes." I didn't know if I could believe her, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to try any more. After finding Lisa's journal, I started questioning everything. Every word she said, every move she made, it all felt like a puzzle I couldn't solve. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not just at her, but at myself, too. Why had I let this drag on? Why hadn't I just walked away when I had the chance? Those were the questions that kept me up at night. Lisa tried to reassure me, but it was like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. "We can get through this," she'd say, her eyes full of tears. "I love you." I wanted to believe her, but something about it didn't sit right. Her words sounded hollow, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. One evening, I came home from work a little earlier than usual. The house was quiet, which wasn't unusual, but something felt off. Lisa's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't in the living room or kitchen. I called out her name, but there was no answer. My chest tightened as I walked down the hallway toward our bedroom. The door was cracked open, and I could hear her voice, soft, almost whispering. When I pushed the door open, I saw her sitting on the bed, her phone pressed to her ear. She looked up, startled, and quickly hung up. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No one," she said, a little too quickly. "It was just a spam call." I didn't believe her for a second. I held out my hand. "Let me see your phone." Her face went pale, and she clutched it tighter. "You don't trust me," she said, her voice breaking. "You're damn right I don't," I shot back. "Not after everything that's happened." She hesitated for what felt like an eternity before handing it over. I scrolled through her call history, but there was nothing suspicious, at least nothing I could see. Still, the way she acted made me feel like there was more going on than she was letting on. After that night, the air between Lisa and me was heavier than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, and she could tell. She started acting jittery, avoiding eye contact, and finding excuses to leave the room whenever I pressed her about anything. I decided to take matters into my own hands. One evening, when Lisa was out running errands, I went through her phone more thoroughly. I found nothing, then I checked her laptop. It wasn't until I opened her email that I found something, a deleted folder filled with messages to and from Mark. Some were old, but others were recent. She'd been in contact with him, despite swearing she'd cut him off. I felt my stomach drop as I read her words, the same sweet nothings she used to say to me. When she got home, I was waiting for her in the kitchen, laptop open on the table. "Care to explain this?" I asked, pointing to the screen. Her face turned white, and for a moment I thought she might pass out. "I can explain," she stammered. "Don't bother," I said, my voice colder than I thought possible. "You've already said enough." Lisa broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. She begged me to listen, saying she only reached out to Mark for closure, that it wasn't what it looked like. But I was past the point of believing her. "How many times do you think I'm going to fall for this?" I snapped. "You've lied to me again and again. How do you expect me to trust you now?" She sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she cried. "I love you, but I've been so messed up. I never wanted to hurt you." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, feeling more numb than anything else. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her we could still fix things. But the other part of me, the one that had been betrayed too many times, was ready to walk out the door and never look back. That night, I slept on the couch, or at least I tried to. My mind wouldn't stop racing, replaying every argument, every lie, every broken promise. Something had to give. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained but resolute. I couldn't keep living like this, stuck in a loop of betrayal and mistrust. I needed clarity, not just about Lisa, but about myself and what I wanted for my future. Over breakfast, I told her we needed a serious talk. She nodded, her eyes red from crying all night. I can't keep doing this, I said. We're stuck, and it's not good for either of us. She looked at me, silent for a moment, before finally saying, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I need space to figure it out, and I think you do too." We agreed to take some time apart. Lisa packed a bag and went to stay with her sister while I stayed in the house. At first, the silence was unbearable. Every corner of the house reminded me of her, of us, the way we used to be. But as the days went by, I started to feel lighter. I went for long walks, spent more time with friends, and started focusing on my hobbies again. It wasn't easy, but it felt like I was rediscovering who I was outside of our broken marriage. Lisa and I still talked occasionally, but it was different. The conversations were less about blame and more about understanding. She told me she was seeing a therapist and trying to work through her issues. I told her I was doing the same. After a few months, we met up to talk about where we stood. By then, I knew the answer. "I don't think we can go back to what we had," I told her, my voice steady. "But I want you to know I don't hate you. I just think we're better off apart." She nodded, tears in her eyes, but a small smile on her lips. "I understand," she said. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry for everything." We signed the divorce papers a few weeks later. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined for us, but it was the one we needed. Looking back, I learned a lot from the whole mess. Love isn't just about the good times. It's about showing up when things get hard, and trust. Once it's gone, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. If I could give anyone advice, it'd be this: don't ignore the signs, don't settle for half-truths, and most importantly, don't lose yourself trying to fix something that's already broken.